How do you feel about the video game Starfield? Just asking this question is controversial. And if you don't play video games, bear with me for a moment because, of course, that's not really what we're here to talk about. Built by Megalith Gaming Studio Bethesda Games, the world had high expectations from Starfield, especially in the wake of its insanely popular Elder Scrolls Skyrim. Bethesda tried a different tack with Starfield, or more accurately, several different tacts, but a critical review of the odd game design choices of Starfield is beyond the scope of this discussion. Rather than the common video game story trope of uncovering bigger and bigger threats and eventually saving the world, Starfield's story begins at the end of a brutal civil war, in a time of relative galactic peace. The focus of the story is on exploration, with no ever-looming existential threat, either at the beginning of the game or by its conclusion. Now at this point, it is fair to give a spoiler warning if you were actually going to play Starfield anyways, which you weren't. But if for some reason you were, you have been warned. Now, while the relatively peaceful storyline of Starfield bored some players, one quest sticks with me to this day. You're sent to uncover the origins of the Starborn, a race of powerful and enigmatic beings discovered partway through the story. This quest leads you to a series of journal entries penned by the first Starborn as they struggled to find purpose and meaning in an existence where none of their actions had lasting impact. For the Starborn, power and agelessness is obtained by traveling between parallel universes. But each time they do, they leave behind everything and everyone that they had become attached to, never to see them again. Whether accumulated wealth and belongings, notoriety, family, friends, and relationships, the first Starborn, after many such transdimensional journeys, begins to question their purpose. If your lifestyle causes you to frequently leave your existing social circles to rebuild community somewhere new, how can you develop deep and meaningful impact on the lives of those around you? Eventually, the first Starborn decides to settle down in one universe, finding peace in making a real difference in the lives of those around them, rather than just being a continual observer. Separated from the source of their power, eventually they die and the player is left with nothing but the notes of their mental struggles as they deliberate between deep connection and unlimited growth at the expense of isolation. Our struggle as people to have impact and meaning, to give some purpose to our limited mortal existences, extends, of course, beyond fictional characters in Starfield's story. Even the players struggled with the concept of hopping between multiple universes. While traveling to the next multiverse would imbue the player with successive growth in power in what is, perhaps to Bethesda's credit, the most brilliant New Game Plus mode ever invented, players were conflicted about even using it. When a player powered up their character by leaving their universe behind and traveling to a brand new one, they too would leave behind everything they'd built. Relationships with NPCs or in-game characters that were earned through hours of otherwise unrewarding side quests, planetary exploration data, handcrafted outposts, a fleet of custom starships, and piles of gear that would make even the most devoted loot goblin blush. All of these would be erased when the player chose to travel to the next universe. And so, many didn't. We strive to overcome the finality of our mortal existence by creating impact on the world that will outlive us, and Starfield asks players to give up that drive for permanence as the price to see the next universe. Real life, sadly, is not Starfield, but we too struggle to create something that lasts indefinitely. Stories of heroism, devotion, or adventure that outlast our mortal shells and inspires countless future generations. Raising children that go on to raise children of their own, who go on to raise more children, and so on, carrying a piece of ourselves genetically into the future. Breakthrough inventions or entrepreneurial endeavors that will earn us a page in the world's history book, immortalized by Wikipedia. Even ancient stories of some form of afterlife or an intangible essence that transcends death, like a soul. These stories can be life-altering at best, or copium at worst. Coming to terms with impermanence is one of the biggest hurdles we all face, and to do so successfully, without succumbing to nihilism, is of utmost importance for maintaining unyielding happiness. This is not said to blame or to point fingers, by the way. As a longtime advocate for radical life extension, sort of like Brian Johnson, I too desire unachievable permanence. I don't necessarily propose that we should give up any and all desires for permanent or lasting impact. But I do encourage an outlook that permits fulfillment whether we achieve that lasting impact or not. What strategies can we use to embrace impermanence and let go of that need for forever? If you're with me to this point and you agree that the desire for permanence is something that we should strive to overcome, I'll give a few tips that I've come up with that might help you in this struggle. The first is simply to enjoy the thing while it lasts, whatever that thing might be. Fear around impermanence is often rooted in the expectation of future loss. The last day of a vacation, enjoyable as it should be, might be inhibited by the knowledge that you need to go back to work tomorrow. The last bite of a delicious meal or snack might be bittersweet rather than just sweet, if one dwells on the fact that another taste will not succeed it. One might find excitement in meeting new people, but fear the loss of that passion as new relationships become predictable, established ones. In my own life, I might find a challenging trail run through the wilderness exhilarating, but tempered by the knowledge that eventually, aging will cause loss of function to the point where such endeavors become impossible for me. If we're not mindful, these gloomy expectations of future loss can prevent enjoyment of what we have in the present. The Japanese concept of Wabi-sabi is often interpreted as accepting the perfection in the imperfection. That an artwork or a performance, for example, is not made worse by its imperfections or asymmetries, but rather that such qualities make it unique and beautiful. Now, Wabi-sabi can also mean appreciating the beauty of the impermanent. The cherry blossom tree with its brilliant white or pink flowers when in bloom can still be appreciated outside of the flowering season. And in fact, those bright flowers are perhaps even more exquisite because of their transience rather than in spite of it. A pristine piece of glazed pottery may develop cracks and lose its luster with age, a copper statue will form a patina due to corrosion, an aged wine sitting in someone's basement for 200 years will acquire a unique flavor that's difficult to replicate. Apparently so will a McDonald's hamburger, but I digress. The impermanence of the qualities of these things enhances them rather than diminishing them. Regardless of inevitable loss or change of what we have now, we can consciously decide to enjoy it while we have it. Now, number 2, it's also important to set appropriate expectations and priorities. To create disappointment, one must simply experience a differential between expectation and reality. I am not necessarily encouraging that you set all of your expectations at the lowest possible level in the hope of finding happiness, as this can introduce its own host of problems. However, I absolutely encourage realistic expectations. And expectations of anything being forever are doomed to disappoint. If you have something you want to keep, please do maintain it for as long as you reasonably can. Cherish your time with it, and be willing to let it go when your time with it runs out. Adopting the healthy expectation that all things in life are fleeting permits us the opportunity to prioritize with clarity. I know my exotic vacation will only last a few days, so of course I will prioritize seeing all of the iconic things or eating at the most recommended restaurants, rather than sitting in bed for 3 hours each morning scrolling. But not all gifts are so easy to recognize. Maybe your job isn't lucrative or fulfilling, but also maybe it isn't stressful or time-consuming. While you may not have the money to do much, you might have time. That time can be cherished and spent wisely, whether on cooking delicious or nutritious meals daily, going for a walk in the park during the evenings, or investing that time in learning and personal development. After all, when you do get the opportunity to advance to a higher-paying career, that free time may disappear in cost. Good relationships are just as much of a gift. By expecting people in our lives to be there forever, we are taking for granted the gifts of road trips, laughing over shared meals, and being able to share our fears and hopes with an empathetic ear. But none of these relationships last forever, nor should we expect them to. Parents age and pass away, siblings and friends move across the country, or perhaps to another country entirely, or they marry and have children and become too busy to hang out every weekend. Romantic partners grow apart for any number of reasons, not limited to incompatibility of life goals, loss of passion, or simply being unable or unwilling to put in the significant effort required to maintain a healthy romantic partnership. When we see these relationships with others as a failure simply because they eventually ended, we lose sight of the gifts they have given us. And if we handle our current relationships with the fear of loss, we'll be unable to appreciate what we have while we have it. Memento Mori reminds us that someday we all die, and we ignore or distract ourselves from this inevitable truth to our detriment. If we can expect to live around 4,160 weeks on average, what will we choose to do with each one of them? Facing our mortality forces us to cherish the time we have left and set priorities accordingly. As Sam Harris said recently, when reflecting upon 2024 and resolving to live 2025 as though his time left were extremely limited, he asked, "Would I watch a bad movie? Probably not. Would I watch a bad movie with my daughters? Absolutely." We can also consider decluttering. That is, identifying material possessions that truly give us meaning, utility, or happiness, and mercilessly discarding the rest. Now, this was popularized in recent history by Marie Kondo, and decluttering has us ask of each of our possessions, does this bring me joy? This is another way to set priorities around resources that are similarly impermanent, primarily money and time. After all, maintaining a large home with an expansive lawn and fruit trees requires both. Does that home bring you joy? If your kitchen cabinets are crammed full of an unreasonable number of plastic containers, baking sheets, and special occasion glassware, do those things bring you joy? Or just stress when you can't find or quickly access the one that you need right now? And no, I'm obviously not speaking from personal experience. Obviously. Or is your inbox filled daily with special offers, newsletters, and social media notifications that take you half an hour to sort and delete? Does this glut of digital spam mail bring you joy? Or is it just a time suck? Again, I'm speaking purely hypothetically, not from my own experiences at all. Of course. Decluttering can also focus on non-tangibles. Which relationships are healthy and supportive, and which should you politely allow to fall to the side? Which projects or goals are of highest value to you, and which should you abandon, or at least delay, in order to prioritize those most important ones? Prioritization is simply the process of respecting the impermanence or limitations of resources, like time, and focusing it on those things that are the most meaningful to you. And lastly, and in conclusion, the third point is to remember that impermanence does not discriminate. Impermanence applies equally to the bad and the good. While that perfect weekend getaway will eventually come to an end, so too will the pain and grief associated with the loss of a loved one. It can be difficult to realize this in the moment, but all acute pains lessen in time. Of course, the sum of our experiences shape who we are. While the extremes of our positive and negative moments may fade, nothing will return completely to the way it once was. This is, of course, another facet of impermanence. Nonetheless, when we fall into despair at our lowest point and ask ourselves, will this ever end, or will it ever get better, the answer is almost always yes. When one thing ends, another can begin. Impermanence brings with it the possibility of novelty, epiphany, and unexpected pleasantness. Cherish what you have while you have it, and know that its impermanence does not diminish its value.